Chapter 1. The lie you were taught about emotions. You were taught a lie about emotions. Not deliberately. Not maliciously. But consistently. From an early age, you were told that emotions are guides. That feelings reveal truth. That listening to what you feel is the same as listening to wisdom. You were encouraged to express yourself. To follow your heart. To trust your instincts. And for a while, this seemed harmless. But no one explained the difference between feeling something and being ruled by it. No one explained that emotions evolved for survival, not for success. No one explained that intensity does not equal accuracy. No one explained that emotions are reactions, not strategies. As a result, most people grow up mistaking emotional force for authority. They feel strongly, so they act quickly. They feel uncomfortable, so they escape. They feel uncertain, so they hesitate. They feel overwhelmed, so they quit. And they call this being honest with themselves. What they are actually doing is surrendering control. Your emotional system was designed in a world where immediate reaction meant survival. Fear kept your ancestors alive. Anger removed threats. Pleasure reinforced behaviors that sustained the body. These systems worked perfectly, for that world. But that world no longer exists. Today, the greatest threats are not physical. They are psychological. Distraction. Comfort. Avoidance. Impulsivity. Your nervous system does not understand long-term goals. It does not understand careers, discipline, reputation, or legacy. It understands only one question. Is this safe right now? Difficult conversations feel unsafe. Effort feels unsafe. Uncertainty feels unsafe. Delayed reward feels unsafe. So your emotional system pushes you away from them. Not because they are bad. But because they are unfamiliar. And unfamiliar has always been dangerous, evolutionarily. This is the root of most self-sabotage. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are not undisciplined by nature. You are governed by a system that prioritizes immediate comfort over future strength. The danger begins when you allow that system to decide. Most people do. They don't consciously choose their reactions. They experience them. And because emotions arrive quickly and forcefully, they feel undeniable. But emotional intensity is not truth. It is chemistry. Hormones rise. Neurotransmitters fire. Your body shifts state. And if you act in that state, you reinforce it. Every emotional reaction strengthens a neural loop. Every loop makes the next reaction faster. More automatic. More convincing. Over time, reaction stops feeling like a choice. It feels like identity. I'm just an emotional person. I can't help how I feel. That's just who I am. These statements sound like self-acceptance. They are actually surrender. When you believe emotions define you, discipline feels unnatural. Focus feels forced. Consistency feels exhausting. Because you are no longer directing your behavior. You are negotiating with impulses. And impulses always demand payment upfront. Short-term relief. Long-term damage. This is why emotional people feel busy but unfulfilled. Why they feel drained without progress. Why they repeat behaviors they regret while fully understanding the consequences. Understanding does not equal control. Awareness alone does nothing if authority is misplaced. Here is the truth most people never hear. Emotions are not enemies, but they are not leaders. They are signals, not commands. They are sensations, not instructions. They are temporary, not prophetic. They rise. They peak. They pass. Unless you act on them. Action gives emotion permanence. A single angry response becomes a pattern. A single avoidance becomes a habit. A single indulgence becomes an identity. Self-control begins with recognizing this gap. The gap between feeling and action. Between impulse and response. Between stimulus and choice. Most people live as if this gap does not exist. But it does. And in that gap lives power. Not loud power. Not emotional power. Quiet power. The power to delay. The power to observe. The power to choose. This power is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It simply acts, when it is time. Every disciplined person you admire operates from this place. They feel fear, and move anyway. They feel discomfort, and stay present. They feel temptation, and decline without negotiation. Not because they are stronger emotionally. But because emotions do not outrank their standards. This chapter is not asking you to suppress emotion. It is asking you to demote it. To move emotions out of leadership. And place them back where they belong. As information. As feedback. As data. Not as decision makers. Once you understand this, your entire relationship with yourself changes. You stop asking, "What do I feel like doing?" And start asking, "What does this moment require?" That single shift separates people who drift from people who build. And everything that follows in this book depends on that understanding. Because self-control is not a technique. It is an identity. And identities are not formed through motivation. They are formed through repeated, conscious choice. Choice begins here. Chapter 2. Why you feel out of control and why it is not your fault. If self-control were simply a matter of willpower, most people would have solved it by now. They know what they should do. They know what they shouldn't do. They know the consequences. And yet, they still react. They still overthink. They still give in. They still repeat patterns they promised themselves they would stop. This creates confusion. People assume the problem must be character. Or discipline. Or motivation. They tell themselves they are weak. They are wrong. The real problem is that they are fighting a system they don't understand. Your brain is not designed for modern life. It is designed for survival. And survival operates on a completely different rulebook than success. At the center of this system is a part of your brain that works faster than thought itself. It does not reason. It does not plan. It does not wait for permission. It reacts. This system was built to keep you alive, not effective. When it senses threat, real or imagined, it takes control instantly. Your heart rate changes. Your muscles tense. Your attention narrows. Your body prepares to act. This happens before logic ever enters the conversation. By the time you are aware of what you're feeling, your nervous system has already decided something is wrong. And in the modern world, wrong rarely means danger. It means discomfort. Criticism. Uncertainty. Boredom. Effort. Waiting. Your brain treats these experiences as threats because, historically, anything unfamiliar could kill you. So it pushes you toward relief. Relief feels like safety. Safety feels like survival. Scrolling instead of thinking. Eating instead of feeling. Avoiding instead of confronting. Reacting instead of pausing. These are not moral failures. They are automatic responses. But automatic does not mean unavoidable. The problem is that most people never question these responses. They assume the feeling is the truth. I feel overwhelmed, so this must be too much. I feel anxious, so this must be dangerous. I feel angry, so someone must be wrong. But feelings are interpretations, not conclusions. Your brain is constantly predicting danger based on incomplete information. And once it predicts danger, it shifts resources away from long-term thinking. This is why emotional moments feel urgent. Why they feel convincing. Why they demand action. Your rational mind goes offline. Not completely, but enough. Enough that nuance disappears. Enough that consequences feel distant. Enough that short-term relief looks intelligent. This is why people send messages they regret. Why they quit plans they care about. Why they sabotage progress at the first sign of resistance. They are not choosing poorly. They are choosing fast. And speed without clarity always creates damage. Here is the part most people never realize. Every time you react instead of choose, you train your brain to do it again. Your brain learns through repetition, not intention. It does not care what you meant to do. It cares what you did. Each reaction strengthens the neural pathway that produced it. Each escape reinforces avoidance. Each indulgence deepens dependency. Over time, reaction becomes default. And default begins to feel like identity. I'm just impulsive. I overthink everything. I have a short temper. These are not traits. They are practiced responses. The good news is that what was practiced can be retrained. But only if you stop blaming yourself and start understanding the system. Self-control does not begin with forcing behavior. It begins with restoring authority to the part of your brain designed to lead. The part that plans. The part that delays. The part that evaluates. This part is slower, but stronger. It does not shout. It does not panic. It does not beg. It waits. And because it waits, it is often ignored. Modern life makes this imbalance worse. You are surrounded by triggers. Notifications. Deadlines. Noise. Opinions. Your nervous system is rarely calm enough to recover. So it stays activated. And when a system is always activated, it becomes sensitive. Small things feel big. Minor obstacles feel overwhelming. Normal effort feels exhausting. This is why people say they are burned out even when they are not doing much. It is not the workload. It is the constant emotional activation. Self-control is not about suppressing this system. It is about regulating it. Teaching it that not every sensation requires action. Not every feeling requires expression. Not every urge deserves obedience. This training happens in moments so small they seem insignificant. Pausing before responding. Breathing before deciding. Staying present instead of escaping. These moments do not feel heroic. But they compound. Each pause restores authority. Each delay strengthens control. Each conscious response rewires the system. Over time, the same triggers lose power. Not because they disappear. But because you are no longer ruled by them. This is what emotionally controlled people have that others don't. Not better emotions. Better regulation. They feel everything, but they don't let feelings drive the wheel. They understand that emotions are weather, not climate. Signals, not sentences. Energy, not direction. And because they understand this, they stop fighting themselves. They don't argue with impulses. They don't negotiate with discomfort. They don't dramatize internal states. They observe, and proceed. This chapter is meant to remove shame. You were not failing because you lacked strength. You were failing because you lacked understanding. Once you understand the mechanics, control becomes a skill, not a mystery. And skills can be trained. The next chapter will show you exactly where that training begins. Not with motivation. Not with discipline. But with awareness precise enough to interrupt the reaction itself. That is where real self-control starts. Chapter 3. The moment control is decided. Most people believe self-control is tested in big moments. Major decisions. High-pressure situations. Life-changing opportunities. They are wrong. Self-control is almost never lost in dramatic moments. It is lost quietly. Privately. In seconds no one sees. It is lost in the moment before the reaction. Before the excuse. Before the rationalization. And because this moment is so small, most people never notice it. They only see the aftermath. The message they shouldn't have sent. The habit they promised to break, repeated again. The plan they abandoned without a clear reason. They assume control failed somewhere along the way. In reality, control was never present. Because control is not something you summon after emotion arrives. It is something you establish before it takes over. There is a fraction of time, barely noticeable, between stimulus and response. A comment lands. A thought appears. A sensation rises. And then, if you are untrained, reaction follows immediately. But that sequence is not inevitable. There is a gap. It may last milliseconds. It may last seconds. But it exists. And in that gap, everything is decided. Not your mood. Not your personality. Not your past. Your authority. Most people live as if this gap does not exist. They feel, and they act. I didn't think. It just happened. I couldn't help it. I reacted without realizing. These statements feel true because the gap is invisible to the untrained mind. But invisible does not mean unreal. The gap is not something you create. It is something you notice. And noticing it changes everything. Because the moment you can observe an impulse, you are no longer identical to it. The moment you can name a sensation, you are no longer controlled by it. Observation creates separation. And separation creates choice. This is the foundation of self-control. Not force. Not resistance. Not suppression. Awareness. But not casual awareness. Precise awareness. Most people think they are aware of their emotions. They are not. They are aware after the emotion has already hijacked the system. They notice anger once words are already forming. They notice anxiety once avoidance has already begun. They notice temptation once the decision feels made. This is awareness too late. Effective awareness happens earlier. It happens at the level of sensation, not story. Before the mind explains. Before it justifies. Before it escalates. A tightening in the chest. A shift in breathing. A sudden urgency. A subtle restlessness. These signals are quiet. Which is why they are missed. And because they are missed, the louder reaction feels uncontrollable. People try to control behavior without controlling attention. This never works. Behavior is downstream. Control upstream. If you want control over actions, you must gain control over attention. Attention is the gateway. Whatever you attend to grows. Whatever you ignore fades. When emotion arises, it demands attention. If you give it full focus, it amplifies. Thoughts multiply. Stories form. Urgency increases. But if you observe it without feeding it, something unexpected happens. It peaks, and declines. Emotions behave like waves. They rise. They crest. They fall. Unless you interfere. Interference keeps them alive. Arguing with the feeling. Justifying it. Rehearsing it. Acting on it. This is why people feel stuck in emotions. They are not stuck. They are sustaining. Control begins the moment you stop participating automatically. The moment you watch instead of react. This does not feel powerful at first. It feels uncomfortable. Because your system expects immediate response. When you delay, it protests. Urgency increases. Discomfort spikes. Thoughts become louder. This is not failure. This is withdrawal. You are interrupting a conditioned loop. And like any interrupted habit, resistance appears. Most people interpret this resistance as proof they cannot control themselves. In reality, it is proof that control is beginning. The ability to stay present during this discomfort is the skill. Not eliminating the emotion. Not changing it. Not replacing it. Staying with it, without obeying it. This is where discipline is born. Not from aggression toward the self, but from composure. Emotion wants motion. Control provides stillness. Stillness does not mean passivity. It means delay. Delay breaks compulsion. Even a few seconds change the outcome. A delayed response is a different response. A delayed decision is a better decision. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear calm. Not because they feel less, but because they pause more. They have trained themselves to recognize the moment control is decided. They know the exact internal sensation that precedes loss of control. And they intervene there. Not later. Not after damage. At the source. This is also why motivation is unreliable. Motivation appears after emotion. It fluctuates with mood. Self-control operates before emotion dictates behavior. It does not require inspiration. It requires awareness. And awareness is trainable. Not through affirmations. Not through intensity. Through repetition. Repeated noticing. Repeated pausing. Repeated choosing. Each repetition strengthens the gap. Makes it clearer. Longer. More accessible. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes automatic. You still feel emotion. But it no longer feels urgent. You still feel temptation. But it no longer feels authoritative. You still feel discomfort. But it no longer decides. This is the shift. From being inside the emotion, to being the one who observes it. From identification to leadership. This chapter is not asking you to change anything yet. It is asking you to see something you may have never been taught to see. The exact moment your future is decided, quietly, internally. Because once you can see it, you can train it. And once you can train it, self-control stops being a struggle. It becomes a standard. Chapter 4. Why willpower fails, and what actually works. Most people believe self-control is a matter of willpower. They think that if they just try harder, resist more, or push through discomfort, control will eventually stabilize. It won't. Willpower is not a foundation. It is a temporary resource. And anything that depends on a temporary resource will eventually collapse. You have experienced this already. You start strong. You feel determined. You commit. Then life applies pressure. Fatigue. Stress. Distraction. Emotion. And the resolve fades. This is not because you lack strength. It is because you are using the wrong system. Willpower works only when conditions are ideal. Self-control works regardless of conditions. The difference is structure. Willpower asks, can I force myself right now? Control asks, who is in charge? Most people attempt to overpower impulses instead of outranking them. They negotiate with urges. They argue internally. They exhaust themselves. And eventually, exhaustion wins. Because effort without authority always loses. Real control does not come from tension. It comes from hierarchy. In a stable system, decisions do not require debate. They are executed. Your emotional system should not be consulted on every action. It should be informed, and then directed. But most people invert this hierarchy. Emotion speaks first. Logic responds. Action follows emotion. This is backwards. Emotion is fast, but short-sighted. Logic is slower, but strategic. When speed outranks strategy, damage accumulates. This is why intelligent people still self-sabotage. They know better, but they decide worse. Because knowledge without command is powerless. The missing element is internal authority. Not harshness. Not repression. Authority. Authority does not shout. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It decides. Think about moments when you were calm under pressure. You did not feel fearless. You did not feel confident. You simply acted correctly. Those moments were not driven by motivation. They were driven by clarity. Clarity ends negotiation. Most emotional struggle comes from constant internal debate. Should I respond? Should I wait? Should I push myself today? Should I take a break? These questions seem reasonable. They are not. They invite impulse into leadership. The disciplined mind does not ask permission from emotion. It sets standards. Standards remove friction. When something is non-negotiable, it requires no energy. You do not debate whether to stop at red lights. You do not deliberate whether to brush your teeth. Not because these things are easy, but because they are decided. This is what self-control actually is. Pre-decided behavior. Most people attempt to decide in the moment. This is why they lose. In the moment, emotion is strongest. Perspective is weakest. Urgency is highest. The decision is already biased. Control must be installed before emotion arrives. Not as a reaction, but as a system. This is why rules outperform goals. Goals are aspirational. Rules are operational. I want to be disciplined is vague. I do not act on impulse is precise. The brain respects clarity. Ambiguity invites debate. Debate invites emotion. Emotion overrides intention. Self-control becomes stable when identity replaces effort. Not what you want to do, but who you are. I don't overreact. I don't respond immediately. I don't abandon commitments based on mood. These are not affirmations. They are positions. And positions create behavior. When identity is clear, behavior follows without resistance. This is why trying to feel motivated is pointless. Motivation is emotional alignment. It comes and goes. Identity does not negotiate. The most controlled people do not feel constantly disciplined. They feel neutral. They do not feel like they are fighting themselves. Because they are not. The fight ended when hierarchy was restored. Emotion became input. Mind became director. This is also why suppression fails. Suppressing emotion creates tension. Tension demands release. Control is not suppression. It is containment. You allow emotion to exist, without allowing it to decide. This creates internal calm. Not because emotions disappear, but because they no longer create chaos. A governed system is quiet. Not silent. Quiet. Noise comes from conflict. Conflict ends when leadership is clear. This chapter is where most people resist. Because they confuse control with rigidity. They fear becoming cold. Detached. Inauthentic. This is a misunderstanding. The most emotionally controlled people are not less human. They are more intentional. They feel deeply, but respond selectively. They choose expression, not reaction. They understand that not every feeling deserves action. And not every urge deserves expression. Expression without control is not authenticity. It is impulsivity. Authenticity with control is strength. This is what separates maturity from emotional volatility. Children react. Adults choose. This book is not asking you to eliminate emotion. It is asking you to grow out of emotional leadership. To stop outsourcing decisions to chemistry. To stop confusing intensity with truth. To stop allowing temporary states to create permanent outcomes. From this point forward, everything becomes practical. Not in the form of tricks, but in the form of systems. Because once hierarchy is restored, techniques actually work. Without hierarchy, techniques collapse under pressure. The next chapter will introduce the first system. Not a method for controlling emotion, but a method for interrupting it before it escalates. This is where theory becomes application. Quietly. Precisely. Effectively. Chapter 5. The pause that makes you powerful. Most people believe control is something you build over time. They think it comes later. After practice. After discipline improves. After they get better. But real control is available immediately. Not because you are strong, but because you can pause. The pause is the most underestimated form of power. It does not look impressive. It does not feel dramatic. It does not announce itself. But it is the difference between reaction and command. Every emotional reaction depends on speed. Anger needs immediacy. Anxiety needs urgency. Impulse needs momentum. If you remove speed, you remove dominance. The pause is not about calming down. It is not about reasoning. It is not about positive thinking. It is about interruption. Most people think they lose control because emotions are too strong. That is not true. They lose control because the reaction happens uninterrupted. Emotion rises, action follows. No break. No space. No delay. Control begins the moment that sequence is broken. Even briefly. A pause of 2 seconds changes the entire system. Because it shifts leadership back to awareness. This is why reactive people hate silence. Silence removes momentum. Momentum sustains emotion. When you pause, the emotion does not disappear. But it loses leverage. This pause is physical before it is mental. Trying to think your way into control rarely works in the moment. Thought is slow. Emotion is fast. But the body can interrupt instantly. This is why the first pause is behavioral. You stop typing. You stop speaking. You stop moving toward the impulse. You do not explain. You do not justify. You do not argue internally. You stop. This physical interruption sends a signal deeper than thought. It signals authority. The nervous system recognizes command through action, not intention. Stopping is an act of leadership. And leadership stabilizes systems. Most people believe the moment they feel emotion, control is already gone. This belief keeps them trapped. The truth is simpler. Control is lost only when motion continues. If you stop, control returns. Not fully. Not comfortably. But sufficiently. The pause creates friction. And friction slows the emotional surge. This is where people panic. They mistake discomfort for danger. They think, if I don't react, something bad will happen. But that is the lie emotion tells to preserve control. Urgency is a bluff. Emotion exaggerates consequences. It says, respond now or you'll lose respect. Decide now or you'll miss out. Act now or this feeling will never end. None of this is true. Emotion fades. Consequences compound. The pause protects the future at the expense of the present feeling. This is why it feels difficult. You are choosing long-term authority over short-term relief. This choice does not feel good at first. But it feels clean. Clean decisions age well. The pause does not require perfection. It does not require calm. It requires only interruption. You do not need to know what the right response is yet. You only need to stop the wrong one from happening. This is why the pause is powerful. It buys time. Time restores perspective. Perspective restores choice. Choice restores control. Most people try to jump straight to choice. They fail because they skip the pause. They attempt to respond better while still emotionally activated. That is like trying to steer a car while accelerating uncontrollably. First, you slow down. Then you steer. The pause is the brake. Without it, no technique works. With it, even simple judgment is enough. This is also why reactive people over-explain. They talk to fill silence. They act to escape tension. They respond to discharge emotion. The pause forces containment. Containment builds strength. Think of it this way. Every time you pause instead of react, you train your system to tolerate discomfort. Tolerance is the foundation of discipline. If you cannot tolerate emotional discomfort, you will always choose relief over results. The pause trains tolerance. And tolerance compounds into resilience. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear unshakable. Not because they don't feel pressure. But because pressure does not rush them. They are not fast. They are precise. They are not intense. They are stable. This stability is not passive. It is controlled readiness. The pause also reveals something critical. Once you stop reacting, you begin to see clearly. You notice the exaggeration. The assumptions. The mental noise. You realize how much of your emotional urgency was narrative, not reality. This is not achieved by thinking harder. It is achieved by pausing long enough to let the system settle. Most people never experience this. They live their entire lives reacting in motion. So they assume emotion is absolute. The pause exposes its impermanence. And once you see that, fear loses authority. Anger loses justification. Impulse loses credibility. This is why the pause feels threatening to emotion. It dismantles the illusion of necessity. Nothing about this pause is aggressive. It is not suppression. It is not denial. It is acknowledgement without obedience. You are saying, I see you, but you do not decide. That single stance changes everything. This is also why the pause is not dramatic. It is almost invisible. No one applauds restraint. No one celebrates silence. But every strong life is built on unobserved restraint. Every reputation is protected by moments where someone chose not to react. Every success is sustained by moments where someone paused instead of panicked. This chapter is not about mastering emotion. It is about installing a single interruption. A pause so small it feels insignificant. Yet strong enough to shift identity. Because each time you pause, you reinforce a new self-image. I do not react immediately. I do not move without clarity. I am not rushed by emotion. These are not thoughts. They are experiences. And experiences shape identity faster than beliefs ever will. From this point forward, the work deepens. The pause is the entry point. But it is not the end. The next chapter will show you how to use this pause to choose responses that align with who you are becoming, not who emotion wants you to be in the moment. This is where control becomes direction. Not just stopping. But steering. Chapter 6. Choosing response over reaction. Pausing is not the goal. Pausing is the doorway. What happens next determines whether control becomes temporary or structural. Most people can stop themselves briefly. They hesitate. They pause. They hold back. And then they fall apart anyway. Not because the pause failed. But because nothing replaced the reaction. Silence without direction creates pressure. And pressure always looks for release. This is where most attempts at self-control collapse. People pause. But they don't choose. They delay. But they don't decide. So the old response eventually returns. Reaction waits patiently. Response must be installed. This chapter is about that installation. Because true self-control is not the absence of reaction. It is the presence of command. When the pause creates space, the mind naturally asks a question. Most people ask the wrong one. They ask, "What do I feel like doing now?" That question hands authority straight back to emotion. It feels reasonable. It feels honest. It is destructive. The correct question is quieter. What is required here? Not what feels good. Not what relieves discomfort. Not what defends ego. What serves the direction of your life? This question does something profound. It shifts identity. You are no longer a person inside a feeling. You are a person responsible for an outcome. Responsibility ends emotional chaos. Emotion thrives in ambiguity. Responsibility creates structure. This is why emotionally disciplined people sound different. They don't say, "I felt like I couldn't." They say, "It wasn't appropriate. It wasn't useful. It wasn't aligned." Alignment is the key. Response is not chosen based on intensity. It is chosen based on alignment. Alignment with values. Alignment with long-term goals. Alignment with the person you are becoming. This is why response feels calmer than reaction. Reaction is loud because it demands validation. Response is quiet because it does not need permission. But here is the difficult truth. Choosing response often feels emotionally unsatisfying in the moment. It does not discharge energy. It does not feel expressive. It does not create relief. And that is why it works. Reaction feels relieving because it releases energy outward. Response contains energy and redirects it. Containment builds strength. Every time you respond instead of react, you reinforce a specific identity. I am not controlled by internal weather. I do not outsource decisions to emotion. I decide based on direction, not discomfort. This identity compounds. And once identity compounds, behavior stabilizes. This is why advice fails. Advice tells people what to do. Identity determines what feels natural. When identity is weak, discipline feels forced. When identity is clear, discipline feels inevitable. Most people try to control behavior without defining identity. They ask, "How do I stop reacting?" The better question is, who does not react? Because behavior follows self-concept. If you see yourself as reactive, you will react. If you see yourself as measured, you will pause. If you see yourself as composed, you will choose response. This is not self-deception. It is self-definition. And self-definition is the most powerful psychological force there is. The moment you begin acting as someone who responds deliberately, your brain updates its expectations. Neural pathways reorganize around the new pattern. What once required effort begins to require less. Not because emotion disappears, but because authority has shifted. Response also removes regret. Reaction creates aftermath. Things to fix. Words to undo. Damage to repair. Response rarely requires cleanup. It may feel uncomfortable in the moment. But it leaves no residue. This is the hidden advantage. Emotionally controlled people are not constantly repairing their lives. They are building them. They do not waste energy on recovery from self-inflicted damage. That energy compounds forward. This is why emotional control creates progress even without dramatic effort. Less damage means more momentum. This chapter is not teaching you to be passive. Response can be firm. It can be direct. It can be decisive. But it is never impulsive. Impulse seeks relief. Response seeks resolution. Impulse is personal. Response is strategic. And strategy always outperforms intensity. The reason this feels difficult at first is because your system is addicted to expression. Expression feels like honesty. But honesty without discipline is volatility. Maturity is not hiding emotion. Maturity is choosing how it is expressed, or whether it is expressed at all. You do not owe every feeling an audience. You do not owe every impulse a response. You owe your future consistency. This is where most people fail to grow up emotionally. They confuse authenticity with immediacy. But authenticity without restraint is not strength. It is exposure. The strongest people are not the most expressive. They are the most intentional. They know when silence is wiser. When delay is strategic. When response is necessary. And they act accordingly. The pause creates space. Response gives that space meaning. Together, they form control. Not as an act. But as a way of operating. From here, everything accelerates. Because once you can pause and choose response, you can begin shaping environments, habits, and systems that reduce emotional friction entirely. The next chapter will show you how emotionally controlled people engineer their surroundings so control becomes easier, not harder. They do not rely on strength alone. They design for success. That is where self-control becomes sustainable. Chapter 7. Designing a life that does not require constant control. Most people believe emotionally disciplined individuals are simply stronger. More focused. More composed. More self-controlled by nature. This belief is comforting, because it removes responsibility. If control is a trait, failure is fate. But this belief is false. The most emotionally controlled people are not fighting harder than everyone else. They are fighting less. Not because they care less. But because they have designed their lives to reduce unnecessary battles. This is the difference between effort and intelligence. Most people attempt to control themselves inside chaotic systems. Unstructured days. Unclear priorities. Constant stimulation. Emotional volatility everywhere. And then they blame themselves for failing. This is like trying to stay dry in a storm without shelter. Strength helps, briefly. Design lasts. Self-control was never meant to be used constantly. It is a finite resource. The goal is not to use more of it. The goal is to need less of it. Emotionally disciplined people understand this intuitively. They do not rely on moment-to-moment restraint. They arrange their environment so restraint is rarely required. This begins with one principle. What surrounds you trains you. Your nervous system adapts to patterns, not intentions. If your environment is noisy, your mind becomes reactive. If your environment is unstable, your emotions become volatile. If your environment is impulsive, your behavior follows. Most people underestimate this influence. They think discipline is internal. It is not. It is relational. Between you and what you allow around you. Emotionally controlled people are ruthless about this. Not dramatic. Not obsessive. Deliberate. They remove triggers instead of resisting them. They reduce exposure instead of practicing endurance. They design for calm rather than proving toughness. This is not weakness. This is mastery. Consider how most emotional reactions begin. A notification. A comment. A glance. A thought reinforced by repetition. Very few reactions appear out of nowhere. They are cued. And cues can be altered. If you know what consistently destabilizes you, leaving it unaddressed is not realism. It is negligence. Self-control is not proven by how much chaos you can endure. It is proven by how well you prevent chaos from entering in the first place. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear unbothered. Not because nothing affects them, but because fewer things reach them. They control access. Access to attention. Access to time. Access to emotional space. This begins with boundaries. Not emotional boundaries. Structural ones. When you wake up matters. What you see first matters. What you expose your mind to before it stabilizes matters. Most people wake up and immediately surrender attention. News. Messages. Notifications. Noise. Their nervous system enters reaction mode before they have chosen direction. And they spend the rest of the day trying to recover. Emotionally disciplined people reverse this order. They stabilize first. Then they engage. This single shift dramatically reduces reactivity. Because a regulated system interprets stimuli differently. The same event feels less urgent. The same pressure feels manageable. The same challenge feels solvable. Design also applies to commitments. Most people overcommit emotionally. They say yes impulsively. They agree before thinking. They respond before evaluating. And then they resent the pressure later. This resentment fuels emotional volatility. Emotionally controlled people decide slowly and act consistently. They do not rush commitments. Because they understand that every commitment is a future emotional demand. If you commit impulsively, you will pay emotionally. Design means protecting future calm. This requires saying no early, instead of reacting later. The same applies to people. Your emotional system mirrors the emotional systems around you. Volatile people create volatility. Calm people reinforce calm. This is not philosophy. It is biology. You absorb patterns unconsciously. Emotionally disciplined people are selective. Not arrogant. Not dismissive. Intentional. They do not spend extended time in emotionally chaotic environments unless necessary. And when they do, they limit exposure. Because they understand that control is harder when the system is constantly provoked. This does not mean isolation. It means curation. You are allowed to curate your environment. You are allowed to protect your nervous system. You are allowed to design for the person you are becoming, not the person you were conditioned to be. Design also means routines. Not rigid schedules. Anchors. Anchors stabilize emotion. Consistent sleep. Consistent movement. Consistent periods of silence. These are not productivity hacks. They are emotional regulation mechanisms. A rested system reacts less. A nourished system stabilizes faster. A quiet system thinks clearer. Most emotional volatility is physiological, not psychological. You cannot think your way out of an exhausted nervous system. Design prevents exhaustion. Emotionally disciplined people are boring in the best way. They sleep when they should. They eat predictably. They move regularly. This is not because they lack spontaneity. It is because stability amplifies freedom. When your internal state is regulated, spontaneity does not destabilize you. When it is not, spontaneity becomes chaos. Design reduces friction. Friction drains energy. Energy loss leads to emotional leakage. Leakage looks like irritation. Overreaction. Impulsivity. People blame emotion. The real cause is depletion. Design protects energy. This chapter is where control stops feeling heavy. Because you realize you are not meant to wrestle emotion endlessly. You are meant to build a life that supports composure. This is not avoidance. It is preparation. A well-designed system does not eliminate challenges. It makes you equal to them. Emotionally disciplined people still feel stress. Still face conflict. still experience pressure. But they meet these states from a position of stability, not depletion. This is the advantage. Not emotional numbness. Emotional readiness. This chapter marks a shift. From internal control to external alignment. From effort to intelligence. From resistance to structure. The next chapter will take this further. It will show you how emotionally disciplined people build habits that reinforce control automatically, so discipline compounds without conscious struggle. This is where self-control becomes self-sustaining. Chapter 8. How habits quietly decide who you become. Most people think habits are about efficiency. Waking up earlier. Working faster. Doing more. This misunderstanding keeps them trapped. Habits are not primarily about productivity. They are about identity stabilization. Every habit answers a single question repeatedly. Who is in control here? Emotion or intention? Most people live reactively because their habits reinforce reaction. They wake up and immediately check stimulation. They eat based on craving. They move based on mood. They work based on pressure. These patterns do not look dramatic. But they train the nervous system to follow impulse. And what you practice daily becomes automatic under stress. This is why emotional control collapses when pressure increases. Pressure does not change behavior. It reveals training. In calm moments, almost anyone can pause. Under stress, only habits remain. This is why habits are not optional. They are emotional infrastructure. Emotionally disciplined people understand this. They do not rely on being strong in difficult moments. They rely on patterns installed during calm ones. Their habits do not exhaust them. They stabilize them. This is the key distinction. Most people choose habits based on aspiration. Emotionally controlled people choose habits based on regulation. They ask a different question. Not, will this make me better? But, will this make me more stable? Stability is what allows growth. Without it, progress leaks. Habits reduce decision-making. Decision-making drains emotional energy. When energy drops, reactivity rises. So the goal is not perfect habits. The goal is fewer decisions. Emotionally disciplined people do not decide how to start their day. They start the same way. They do not decide whether to move their body. They move it. They do not decide when to stop working. They stop. This predictability is not rigid. It is protective. Because every decision avoided is energy preserved. And preserved energy equals emotional control later. This is why habits feel boring. Boring is regulated. Chaos feels exciting, until it collapses. Your emotional system craves novelty when it is dysregulated. It seeks stimulation to override discomfort. Habits reduce the need for stimulation. They create internal quiet. Quiet is uncomfortable at first. Because most people are addicted to noise. Noise distracts from internal tension. Habits remove distraction. They force you to confront the internal state. This is why many people avoid routines. Not because they are lazy. But because stillness exposes instability. Habits are a mirror. They show you what you rely on emotionally. When habits are absent, impulse fills the space. When habits are present, impulse weakens. This is not discipline. It is conditioning. Your brain adapts to repetition. If you repeat impulse, it strengthens. If you repeat structure, structure strengthens. This is why trying harder fails. Effort fights conditioning. Habits replace it. Emotionally disciplined people do not try to control themselves all day. They set up defaults. Defaults decide behavior when attention is low. Low attention is when most mistakes happen. Habits act when awareness is tired. This is their hidden power. They carry control forward even when you are depleted. This is also why habits must be simple. Complex habits require constant attention. Attention is finite. Simple habits survive pressure. They do not require motivation. They require execution. Execution becomes automatic through repetition. Most people try to overhaul their lives. Emotionally disciplined people do the opposite. They adjust a few key behaviors that regulate everything else. Sleep. Movement. Silence. Order. These are not lifestyle choices. They are nervous system controls. Poor sleep destabilizes emotion. No movement traps stress. No silence amplifies noise. Disorder increases cognitive load. You cannot outthink these effects. Your emotional system obeys physiology. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear grounded. They are regulated at the base level. Not mentally. Physically. Habits also reinforce identity. Every habit sends a signal. I do what I decided. I keep my word. I act consistently. These signals accumulate. Over time, confidence emerges. Not loud confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind that does not need reassurance. This confidence stabilizes emotion further. Uncertainty fuels reactivity. Self-trust reduces it. Habits build self-trust. Not because they are impressive, but because they are kept. Most people break promises to themselves daily. They do not notice the damage. But the nervous system notices. It learns that intention is unreliable. So it stops cooperating. Emotionally disciplined people are conservative with promises. They choose habits they will keep even when tired. Because consistency matters more than intensity. Intensity spikes emotion. Consistency regulates it. This is why dramatic changes rarely last. They overwhelm the system. Habits must be boring enough to survive bad days. Bad days are the test. Good days prove nothing. Anyone can behave well when they feel good. Habits prove identity when emotion is unstable. This chapter is not asking you to add more. It is asking you to simplify. Remove unnecessary decisions. Reduce stimulation. Repeat stabilizing actions. This does not feel powerful initially. It feels ordinary. But ordinary done daily becomes unshakable. Emotionally disciplined people are not impressive in moments. They are reliable over time. This reliability creates momentum. Momentum reduces emotional friction. Less friction means fewer reactions. This is how control compounds without effort. Not through force. Through design and repetition. The next chapter will address what happens when habits fail. Because they will. You will still experience setbacks. Pressure will still break patterns. Emotion will still surge. Chapter 9 will show you how emotionally disciplined people recover without self-judgment, and why recovery, not perfection, is what actually determines long-term control. Chapter 9. Why setbacks don't ruin control, quitting does. Most people believe self-control is fragile. They think one mistake erases progress. One emotional outburst proves failure. One broken habit invalidates discipline. This belief destroys more growth than emotion ever could. Because it turns normal human error into identity collapse. Emotionally undisciplined people don't fail more often than others. They quit faster. Not because they are weaker. But because they misinterpret setbacks. They treat deviation as evidence. Evidence that they can't change. That discipline isn't for them. That control never lasts. This is not self-awareness. It is self-sabotage disguised as realism. Emotionally disciplined people fail too. They still react sometimes. They still break routines. They still feel overwhelmed. The difference is what happens next. They recover. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Quietly. They do not spiral. They do not analyze themselves into paralysis. They do not turn a moment into a verdict. They return to baseline. Recovery is the real skill. Not control. Control is visible. Recovery is invisible. And invisible skills are usually the most powerful. Most people lose control twice. First, when they react. Second, when they judge themselves for reacting. The second loss is more damaging. Because it adds emotion to emotion. Frustration on top of frustration. Shame on top of mistake. Anger at the self layered onto impulse. This creates emotional momentum. And momentum carries behavior further off course. Emotionally disciplined people do not add commentary. They do not narrate failure. They observe deviation and correct it. That's it. No identity story. No dramatic interpretation. No emotional punishment. Correction is calm. This calmness is not apathy. It is accuracy. Accuracy requires neutrality. You cannot correct something clearly if you are emotionally entangled with it. This is why self-judgment is counterproductive. Judgment narrows attention. It collapses perspective. It keeps you stuck in the moment. Recovery requires distance. Distance restores leadership. Think of discipline as trajectory, not position. Where you are matters less than where you are returning to. A plane off course by 1 degree does not crash. Unless it fails to correct. Correction is continuous. Emotionally disciplined people expect deviation. They design for it. They do not aim for perfection. They aim for rapid recalibration. This is why they appear stable over time. Not because they never wobble. But because wobbling does not derail them. Most people wobble and then abandon direction. They confuse temporary deviation with permanent failure. This belief creates emotional fatigue. Fatigue leads to resignation. Resignation kills progress. The truth is simple. You do not lose self-control by failing once. You lose it by staying down longer than necessary. Recovery speed determines identity. The faster you recover, the less significance failure has. The less significance failure has, the less emotional weight it carries. The less emotional weight it carries, the less it repeats. This is not optimism. It is mechanics. Emotion thrives on meaning. Remove the meaning, reduce the emotion. This is why emotionally disciplined people do not dwell. Dwelling feeds the system. They acknowledge error. Then re-enter structure. They return to routine. They resume habits. They restore order. Order neutralizes emotion. Chaos amplifies it. This is also why dramatic, reset moments rarely work. They are emotional. They rely on intensity. Intensity fades. Structure remains. Recovery should feel boring. Boring is stable. If recovery feels dramatic, it is not recovery. It is reaction in disguise. Emotionally disciplined people do not start over. They continue. They do not announce change. They implement it. They understand that identity is not built by moments of inspiration. It is built by patterns of correction. Every time you recover quickly, you teach your nervous system something critical. This is survivable. This is not catastrophic. This does not define me. Over time, emotion loses leverage. Because it no longer threatens identity. This is why emotionally disciplined people are difficult to destabilize. Not because they never fail. But because failure no longer scares them. Fear fuels reaction. Safety enables control. Recovery creates safety. There is another reason this matters. When people believe discipline requires perfection, they subconsciously avoid trying. Because trying risks failure. And failure threatens identity. So they stay reactive. But comfortable. Emotionally disciplined people remove this threat. They normalize correction. They expect fluctuation. They operate with realism instead of fantasy. This realism produces consistency. Consistency produces confidence. Confidence stabilizes emotion. This loop is quiet, but powerful. This chapter exists to remove pressure. Pressure sabotages growth. Self-control grows in an environment of neutrality. Firmness without hostility. Standards without shame. Correction without drama. This is the emotional posture of mastery. Not intensity. Not harshness. Calm insistence. From here, the work becomes more subtle. Because once recovery is normalized, the final layers of emotional control emerge. The next chapter will address something deeper. Why some emotions return again and again, even when behavior is controlled. And how emotionally disciplined people restructure their internal narratives so emotion loses its recurring grip. That is where control becomes deep. Not just behavioral, but psychological. Chapter 10. The stories that keep emotions alive. By now, you understand how to pause. How to respond instead of react. How to design your environment. How to recover without self-judgment. And yet, there is something deeper you may have noticed. Certain emotions return. Not randomly. Not occasionally. Predictably. The same anxiety. The same anger. The same self-doubt. Even when behavior improves. This confuses people. They assume something is wrong. They think, if I'm disciplined now, why do I still feel this? The answer is simple, but uncomfortable. Behavior changes faster than belief. Emotion is not sustained by events. It is sustained by interpretation. And interpretation lives in narrative. Every recurring emotion is attached to a story. Not a dramatic story. A quiet one. A story about who you are. About what things mean. About what is likely to happen. These stories operate below awareness. They are not consciously chosen. They are repeated. And repetition creates conviction. For example, you don't just feel anxiety. You carry a story that says, I'm always behind. You don't just feel anger. You carry a story that says, people disrespect me. You don't just feel doubt. You carry a story that says, I'm not enough yet. These stories feel like observations. They are not. They are interpretations hardened by time. Emotion feeds on narrative. Narrative gives emotion justification. This is why emotions can persist even when nothing is happening. The story is always happening. Most people attempt to control emotion at the level of behavior. They stop reacting. They improve habits. They regulate routines. But they leave the narrative untouched. So the emotion regenerates. Like a weed cut at the surface. It grows back. Emotionally disciplined people go deeper. They do not argue with emotion. They examine the story beneath it. Not to replace it with positivity. But to weaken its authority. Authority comes from certainty. Stories feel true because they are familiar. Familiarity masquerades as truth. Your brain does not ask, is this accurate? It asks, is this repeated? Repeated thoughts gain priority. They feel automatic. This is why insight alone does not dissolve emotion. You can know something intellectually. And still feel the same emotion. Because the story was never challenged experientially. Emotion does not respond to logic. It responds to evidence. And evidence comes from contradiction. Emotionally disciplined people expose their stories to contradiction. Not by force, but by observation. They notice the narrative forming. They hear the familiar sentence. And instead of believing it, they pause. They ask one question. Is this the only explanation? That question destabilizes certainty. Certainty sustains emotion. Ambiguity weakens it. You do not need a better story. You need less rigid ones. Rigid narratives trap emotion. Flexible narratives allow movement. For example, I always mess this up. Becomes, I've messed this up before. I'm not ready. Becomes, I don't feel ready. I can't handle this. Becomes, this is uncomfortable. These shifts seem minor. They are not. They remove identity from experience. Identity fuels emotion. When emotion feels personal, it intensifies. When it feels situational, it passes. Emotionally disciplined people do not dramatize internal language. They keep it precise. Precision reduces emotional charge. Vagueness amplifies it. This is why emotionally reactive people speak in absolutes. Always. Never. Everyone. Nothing. Absolutes feel convincing. They are emotionally efficient, but inaccurate. Precision requires effort. But it reduces emotional weight. This is not positive thinking. This is accurate thinking. Accuracy is calming. Because it aligns perception with reality. Narratives also survive because they serve a purpose. Even painful stories protect something. Avoidance. Ego. Familiarity. For example, a story of inadequacy protects you from risk. A story of injustice protects your self-image. A story of helplessness protects you from responsibility. Emotion clings to stories that justify behavior. This is why some emotions feel difficult to release. They are tied to identity benefits. Emotionally disciplined people confront this gently, but honestly. They ask, what does this story allow me to avoid? What does it excuse? What would I have to face without it? This is not judgment. It is clarity. Clarity dissolves illusion. Illusion sustains emotion. Once the story is exposed, emotion weakens. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Gradually. Like a structure losing its foundation. The emotion may still appear. But it no longer feels absolute. It no longer defines the moment. This is when emotional control becomes deep. Not because emotions stop. But because they lose narrative fuel. They rise. They are noticed. They pass. Without justification. Without reinforcement. Without replay. This chapter marks a transition. From managing behavior to mastering meaning. Meaning determines emotional recurrence. Change meaning. Change the emotional pattern. The next chapter will take this further. It will show you how emotionally disciplined people rebuild confidence and self-trust, not through affirmation, but through evidence and consistency. This is where emotional control turns into unshakable inner stability. Not forced. Not performative. Inevitable. Chapter 11. The quiet confidence that comes from self-trust. Most people misunderstand confidence. They think it is a feeling. A mindset. A belief you repeat until it sticks. This misunderstanding keeps them chasing something that cannot be chased. Confidence is not generated through thought. It is accumulated through evidence. And evidence is built through consistency. Emotionally disciplined people are not confident because they think highly of themselves. They are confident because they trust themselves. And self-trust is rare. Most people do not trust themselves. They promise and break. They decide and reverse. They commit and abandon. Over time, the nervous system learns something painful. Intentions are unreliable. When intention becomes unreliable, emotion steps in to lead. Doubt increases. Anxiety rises. Confidence erodes. Not because of failure, but because of inconsistency. Emotionally disciplined people reverse this pattern. They rebuild trust with themselves slowly. Not through grand declarations, but through follow-through. Small decisions kept. Simple rules honored. Pauses respected. Each one sends a signal. I do what I decide. I can be relied upon. I don't collapse under pressure. These signals accumulate. And confidence emerges quietly. Not as bravado. Not as arrogance. As steadiness. This steadiness is unmistakable. It does not seek validation. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not fluctuate wildly. It remains. Most people try to feel confident before acting. Emotionally disciplined people act correctly regardless of feeling. And the feeling follows later. This inversion is critical. Confidence does not precede control. Control precedes confidence. This is why affirmations fail. They attempt to create belief without evidence. The mind rejects this. Your nervous system knows the truth of your patterns. You cannot convince it with words. You convince it with behavior. Every time you pause instead of react, you add evidence. Every time you recover without self-attack, you add evidence. Every time you choose response over impulse, you add evidence. Confidence grows from these moments. Not instantly. Cumulatively. This is also why emotionally disciplined people are hard to shake. Their confidence is not situational. It is not dependent on praise, success, or certainty. It is internal. They know they can handle discomfort. They know they can regulate themselves. They know they will not betray their standards under pressure. That knowledge creates calm. Calm creates presence. Presence creates influence. This is why emotionally controlled people are often mistaken for leaders. Even when they say little. Even when they do not dominate. Because people trust stability. Stability feels safe. And safety invites respect. This chapter also addresses a hidden fear. Many people avoid self-control because they believe it will make them rigid. Less expressive. Less spontaneous. Less alive. This fear comes from misunderstanding. Emotionally disciplined people are not numb. They are selective. They do not suppress emotion. They regulate expression. This regulation increases impact. When they speak, it matters. When they act, it counts. When they respond, it lands. Because emotion is no longer leaking constantly. It is directed. This creates authority. Not imposed authority. Earned authority. Authority earned through reliability. Reliability earned through self-trust. Self-trust earned through discipline. This is the loop. And once established, it reinforces itself. Confidence reduces emotional urgency. Reduced urgency improves decisions. Improved decisions build trust. Trust strengthens confidence. This loop is stable. It does not depend on motivation. It does not collapse under stress. This is why emotionally disciplined people feel solid. They are not perfect. They are consistent. They know their limits. They know their patterns. They know their capacity. And because of that knowledge, they do not panic. Panic comes from unpredictability. When you are unpredictable to yourself, anxiety rises. When you are predictable to yourself, anxiety fades. This chapter marks a shift from control as effort to control as identity. You are no longer trying to be disciplined. You are becoming someone who is. This identity does not require performance. It does not need to be announced. It is revealed under pressure. The final chapters will move outward. From internal mastery to external impact. How emotionally disciplined people navigate relationships, pressure, leadership, and long-term direction without losing composure. Not because they are special, but because they are structured. The next chapter will address how self-control transforms relationships, not by making you colder, but by making you clearer. That is where discipline stops being personal and becomes influential. Chapter 12. Self-control in relationships, the power of not escalating. Most people lose emotional control where it matters most. Not in public. Not at work. Not with strangers. They lose it with the people closest to them. Because familiarity lowers discipline. Because attachment triggers emotion faster than logic. And because unresolved inner instability always leaks into relationships. Emotionally undisciplined people believe relationship problems are about communication. They are not. They are about regulation. Two people can use the same words. One creates stability. The other creates chaos. The difference is not language. It is emotional containment. Every relationship has friction. Disagreement. Misunderstanding. Misalignment. The question is not whether conflict happens. The question is who escalates. Escalation destroys relationships faster than betrayal. Because escalation compounds. A tone becomes an accusation. An accusation becomes defensiveness. Defensiveness becomes contempt. And once contempt appears, respect collapses. Emotionally disciplined people break this chain early. They do not match intensity. They do not rush to correct. They do not try to win emotional moments. They regulate first. This is not passivity. It is dominance. Because emotional escalation is weakness masquerading as honesty. People who cannot regulate their emotions force others to regulate for them. That is exhausting. Emotionally disciplined people do the opposite. They become stabilizers. When tension rises, they slow down. When emotion spikes, they lower volume. When accusation appears, they clarify. This creates contrast. Contrast creates authority. Authority calms the room. This is why emotionally disciplined people are often described as grounded. They do not absorb emotional chaos. They deflect it. They do not suppress emotion. They contain it. Containment is the most underrated relational skill. It communicates. I can handle this. I am not threatened. I am in control. People feel this immediately. This is why emotionally reactive people escalate faster around calm individuals. Their nervous systems feel exposed. Calm becomes a mirror. And mirrors make instability uncomfortable. Most people think they need to express emotions to be authentic. Emotionally disciplined people understand something deeper. Unfiltered expression is not authenticity. It is discharge. True authenticity is intentional expression. You can feel anger without weaponizing it. You can feel hurt without dramatizing it. You can feel frustration without transferring it. This separation is maturity. And maturity creates trust. Trust is the foundation of every strong relationship. Not attraction. Not chemistry. Not shared history. Trust. Trust that you will not explode. Trust that you will not disappear. Trust that you will not punish vulnerability. Emotionally disciplined people are trusted faster. Not because they are perfect. But because they are predictable. Predictability reduces anxiety. Anxiety destroys intimacy. This is why emotional control increases closeness, not distance. It allows others to relax. To speak without fear. To disagree without catastrophe. This applies to romantic relationships, friendships, family, and professional environments. The dynamic is universal. Whoever regulates the emotional tone controls the interaction. Not aggressively. Structurally. This is also why arguments with emotionally disciplined people feel different. They do not argue to dominate. They argue to resolve. They listen without collapsing. They speak without attacking. They pause without withdrawing. These behaviors disarm conflict. Not because the other person is wrong, but because escalation requires participation. And emotionally disciplined people refuse to participate in chaos. This refusal is powerful. It forces the interaction to stabilize or end. Both outcomes are healthy. Many people fear that not reacting means losing their voice. The opposite is true. Emotionally disciplined people are heard more. Because when they speak, it is not noise. It is measured. Clear. Intentional. They do not waste emotional energy on moments that do not matter. They save it for moments that do. This creates impact. Over time, this reshapes relationships. Dynamics shift. People adjust their behavior around you. They become more careful with words. More respectful with tone. More honest. Because instability has no foothold. This is emotional leadership in its purest form. Not telling others what to feel, but refusing to be pulled into emotional disorder. The final realization of this chapter is critical. You do not control relationships by controlling people. You control relationships by controlling yourself. Everything else follows. The next chapter will move beyond relationships and into pressure environments, moments where stakes are high, consequences are real, and emotional discipline separates those who collapse from those who lead. This is where self-control becomes destiny. Chapter 13. Building your emotional operating system. Most people fail at self-control for a simple reason. They rely on intention. They try to remember to stay calm. They hope to catch themselves next time. They promise they'll react differently when it matters. This never works. Because emotional control is not a personality trait. It is a system. And without a system, pressure always wins. Your mind already runs on an operating system. Right now. It dictates how fast you react. How intensely you feel. How long emotions linger. How quickly you recover. Most people never examine this system. They inherit it. From childhood. From culture. From trauma. From habit. Then they wonder why they keep repeating the same emotional patterns. An operating system runs automatically. That is the point. So if you want emotional self-control to be automatic, it must be designed. Not improvised. This chapter is not about adding more techniques. It is about installing structure. Because once structure exists, discipline becomes effortless. The first component of your emotional operating system is baseline regulation. This is not about moments of stress. It is about how you live when nothing is happening. Your nervous system does not reset automatically. It carries residue. Sleep debt. Unresolved tension. Mental noise. If your baseline is unstable, every trigger feels bigger than it is. Emotionally disciplined people protect their baseline aggressively. They understand that exhaustion creates reactivity. That hunger creates irritability. That overstimulation creates impulsivity. This is not weakness. It is biology. You cannot think your way out of nervous system overload. You must manage inputs. This means consistent sleep. Controlled stimulation. Deliberate silence. Physical movement. Not as self-care. As maintenance. Just as you would never expect a machine to run flawlessly without upkeep, you cannot expect emotional control without regulation. The second component is trigger awareness. Most people believe emotions are spontaneous. They are not. They are predictable. You react to the same types of situations. The same tones. The same dynamics. Disrespect. Uncertainty. Loss of control. Perceived rejection. Your triggers reveal your unfinished work. Emotionally disciplined people do not avoid triggers. They map them. They know exactly what activates them and why. This removes surprise. And surprise is what gives emotion its power. When you can say, "This always activates me," the reaction weakens. Awareness creates space. Space creates choice. The third component is pre-decided responses. This is where most people fail completely. They wait until they are emotional to decide how to behave. That is too late. When emotion spikes, decision-making capacity drops. So emotionally disciplined people decide in advance. If this happens, I will pause. If that happens, I will slow my breathing. If this tone appears, I will lower mine. These decisions are made when calm. And executed when stressed. This is how professionals operate. Pilots do not invent procedures mid-air. Surgeons do not improvise during emergencies. Why would emotional control be any different? Predecision removes negotiation. And negotiation is where discipline dies. The fourth component is recovery protocols. Even controlled emotions leave residue. Stress accumulates. Tension lingers. If you never discharge it, it leaks. Into relationships. Into sleep. Into health. Emotionally disciplined people do not pretend recovery is optional. They schedule it. Solitude. Silence. Reflection. Movement. Not constantly. But consistently. Recovery is not weakness. It is what allows intensity without collapse. Without recovery, control becomes brittle. Eventually, it breaks. The fifth component is identity reinforcement. This is subtle but critical. Every time you regulate yourself, you send a signal inward. This is who I am. Every time you explode, avoid, or indulge, you send a different signal. Identity is not declared. It is reinforced. Emotionally disciplined people do not say, "I am calm." They act calmly. Repeatedly. Until the identity solidifies. Once identity shifts, effort decreases. You stop fighting yourself. This is the true goal. Not constant vigilance. But alignment. When behavior matches identity, control feels natural. The final component is environment design. Your environment shapes you more than willpower ever will. Noise creates agitation. Clutter creates mental friction. Chaotic people create chaos. Emotionally disciplined people are selective. Not judgmental. Selective. They choose environments that support regulation. They limit unnecessary conflict. They reduce constant stimulation. They distance from chronic volatility. This is not avoidance. It is strategic positioning. You cannot build emotional mastery in an environment designed to destabilize you. This emotional operating system does not make you emotionless. It makes you reliable. To yourself. To others. Under pressure. Once installed, something profound happens. You stop fearing emotion. Because it no longer controls you. You feel fully. But act deliberately. This is the shift from reaction to command. The final chapters will now take this system into high-pressure reality, where stakes are real, consequences are permanent, and emotional control becomes visible power. This is where everything is tested. And where mastery proves itself. Chapter 14. Self-control under pressure, where mastery is revealed. Pressure does not create weakness. It reveals it. Most people believe pressure changes them. It doesn't. It removes the mask. When the stakes rise, when consequences are real, when time compresses and eyes are watching, whatever is inside you surfaces. Not your intentions. Not your values. Your conditioning. This is why people who appear composed in calm moments collapse when it matters. Their control was situational. Not structural. High-pressure environments do not reward intelligence. They reward regulation. Careers are lost not because of incompetence, but because of emotional misfires. Relationships end not because of incompatibility, but because of escalations under stress. Opportunities vanish not because of lack of talent, but because fear hijacked action at the wrong moment. Emotionally disciplined people understand this early. Pressure is not the enemy. Loss of self-command is. In high-stakes moments, the mind narrows. Attention fragments. The nervous system shifts into survival mode. This is not a failure of character. It is biology. And biology must be trained. Most people train skills. Few train states. But under pressure, your state determines access to your skills. A calm mind retrieves knowledge. An agitated mind blocks it. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear sharper under stress. They are not smarter. They are regulated. High-pressure situations share common features. Uncertainty. Time pressure. Evaluation. Consequences. Your brain interprets these as threats. And when threat perception rises, the emotional brain attempts to take control. This is where most people lose the moment. They rush. They over-explain. They over-defend. They overreact. Emotionally disciplined people do the opposite. They slow down. Not externally, internally. They do not fight the stress response. They ride it. They recognize the surge of adrenaline not as panic, but as energy. They let it sharpen focus instead of shatter it. This reframing is critical. Pressure is not a signal to escape. It is a signal to stabilize. Stability under pressure creates leverage. Others rush. You pause. Others speak emotionally. You speak deliberately. Others seek relief. You seek clarity. This contrast is powerful. It shifts the dynamic immediately. In negotiations, the calmer party controls the frame. In conflict, the regulated party controls the pace. In crisis, the composed party becomes the reference point. People look to whoever appears least affected. This is not charisma. It is nervous system leadership. Pressure reveals hierarchy. Not of titles. Of self-control. Emotionally disciplined people prepare for pressure long before it arrives. They do not wait for crisis to practice calm. They train it daily. Through discomfort. Through restraint. Through voluntary challenge. They expose themselves to controlled stress. Cold. Silence. Focus without distraction. Deliberate difficulty. Not to suffer. But to build tolerance. Because tolerance is what prevents collapse. When pressure hits, it feels familiar. Not overwhelming. This is why elite performers seek discomfort. They are not addicted to pain. They are immune to panic. Most people avoid discomfort. They protect comfort. This makes pressure foreign. And foreign sensations trigger fear. Fear clouds judgment. Judgment errors compound quickly under pressure. One emotional mistake creates another. Emotionally disciplined people interrupt this chain early. They reduce the moment to one action. Not the outcome. Not the future. The next correct step. This narrows focus. Focus reduces noise. Noise is what turns pressure into panic. This is the core skill under pressure. Action over rumination. Presence over projection. Process over outcome. You cannot control outcomes under pressure. You can control execution. And execution compounds. Another mistake people make under pressure is emotional leakage. Tone sharpens. Body language tightens. Words accelerate. Others feel this. Pressure is contagious. So is calm. Emotionally disciplined people regulate not only themselves, but the environment. They speak slower. They breathe deeper. They create space. This stabilizes others. Stabilized environments create better decisions. This is why emotionally disciplined people are trusted with responsibility. Not because they never feel pressure, but because they don't spread it. High-stakes environments also expose ego. The need to prove. The need to defend identity. The need to be right. These impulses are deadly under pressure. They turn situations into personal battles. Emotionally disciplined people detach ego from outcome. They do not confuse challenge with threat to identity. They operate from function, not self-image. This detachment increases adaptability. Adaptability wins under pressure. Rigid people break. Flexible people adjust. Self-control is flexibility under stress. Pressure also amplifies consequences. A single reaction can echo for years. An email. A sentence. A decision. Emotionally disciplined people understand this asymmetry. They respect moments. They do not rush irreversible actions. They pause where others react. This pause is not hesitation. It is precision. And precision is power. The final realization of this chapter is simple but unforgiving. You do not rise to the level of your potential under pressure. You fall to the level of your emotional training. There are no exceptions. Pressure does not care about what you know. Only what you can access. And access is controlled by self-control. The final chapter will bring everything together. Not as motivation, but as inevitability. Because once emotional discipline is installed, the outcome is no longer random. It is structural. Chapter 15. The compound effect of self-control. Self-control does not change your life all at once. That is why most people underestimate it. They expect a dramatic shift. A sudden transformation. A moment where everything feels different. That moment rarely comes. Instead, something quieter happens. Your reactions soften. Your decisions sharpen. Your energy stops leaking. And because the change is subtle, most people abandon it. They do not realize that self-control works the same way wealth works. Through compounding. Every time you do not react, you preserve energy. Every time you pause, you protect clarity. Every time you choose restraint over impulse, you make a small deposit. On its own, that deposit seems insignificant. But over time, it multiplies. This is the mistake most people make. They evaluate emotional control by immediate payoff. There is very little. The payoff is delayed. But when it arrives, it is overwhelming. Self-control compounds across every domain of life simultaneously. Your thinking becomes cleaner. Because emotions are no longer distorting perception. Your decisions improve. Because you are not choosing relief over direction. Your relationships stabilize. Because people feel safe around you. Your reputation strengthens. Because you become predictable under pressure. These changes feed each other. Better decisions create better outcomes. Better outcomes reinforce identity. Stronger identity reduces inner conflict. This loop accelerates. Quietly. Relentlessly. Emotionally reactive people live in the opposite loop. Reaction creates damage. Damage creates regret. Regret weakens self-trust. Weakened self-trust increases reactivity. This is not psychology. It is mechanics. And mechanics do not negotiate. Over time, emotionally disciplined people begin to experience a different life. Not an easier one. A cleaner one. Less chaos. Less drama. Less wasted motion. Challenges still exist. But they are faced without self-sabotage. This is the greatest advantage self-control provides. You stop being the problem in your own life. Most people never achieve this. They remain talented but volatile. Intelligent but inconsistent. Capable but unreliable. Not because they lack potential. But because they leak it emotionally. Self-control seals the leaks. And sealed systems build pressure. Pressure creates force. Force creates results. This is why emotionally disciplined people often appear lucky. They are not. They are consistent. Consistency beats intensity every time. Over years, emotional control creates something rare. Trust in yourself. You stop doubting how you'll respond. You stop fearing your own reactions. You know you can handle difficulty without collapse. This creates internal safety. Internal safety frees attention. Freed attention compounds into mastery. This is the true confidence people seek. Not bravado. Not positivity. Reliability. You become someone who can be counted on. By others. And by yourself. This is also why self-control creates peace. Not the absence of struggle. The absence of inner war. You stop negotiating with impulses. You stop justifying weakness. You stop apologizing internally. This silence is powerful. Because energy that was once consumed by inner conflict is now available. For work. For growth. For depth. Over decades, this compounds into something unmistakable. Authority. Not the kind granted by position. The kind felt by presence. People listen differently. They trust faster. They defer naturally. Not because you dominate. But because you are stable. Stability is rare. And rarity creates value. This is the final truth of self-control. It is not a skill you use. It is a structure you live inside. Once installed, it does not require motivation. It does not rely on mood. It does not collapse under pressure. It simply runs. Day after day. Decision after decision. Moment after moment. And because it runs, outcomes stop being random. They become predictable. Not because life is controllable. But because you are. This is why self-control is destiny. Not metaphorically. Mechanically. The question is no longer whether this works. The question is whether you are willing to let it compound. Because every day without it is lost interest. And time does not refund. The work is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is quiet. Daily. Unseen. And unstoppable. This is where the book ends. But the system does not. It continues. Every time you choose restraint. Every time you pause. Every time you refuse to be pulled. That is the work. And once it is installed, it does not ask for belief. Only time.